The story begins in 1975, with a girl named Jim Gray sitting in the chair behind her in Arabic and complaining about the music her parents are listening to. Her mother jokes with her and tells her that she can hear what she wants, but when she gets her driver's license and buys her car when Jim grows up, she is upset by this response, and suddenly the music has changed and become more lively. Her mother changed the station again, but this phenomenon was repeated. Jim swore that she was not doing anything. After that, the radio remained out of control and was purifying and moving between stations at crazy speed. The girl began to worry about the voices in her brain when she shouted at the voices to silence the Arab women. I skied and entered a second Arabic method, and something like a bubble turned. It formed around her and protected her face from the poison scattered everywhere. Jim was admitted to the hospital, and the doctors were surprised that she came out of this incident without a scratch. Unfortunately, its people were unable to live, and this sad news reached Jim from the professor. When I asked him what will happen now, he told her that he was in charge of a school that provided a shelter for children like her when she arrived at the institution. Jim said she wouldn't be able to study there. The need there is very sweet, and she has a habit of breaking things. The professor reassured her that he could help her in this matter, and he promised her that he would fix any need, but she broke it by mistake. 17 years later, America launched the Space Shuttle Endeavour, and the pioneers on board began to face problems. Zapper took a direct call from the president to help them in this situation. After that, the team gathers, and we see that Jim and her fiancé Scott, and also Corto, Peter and Storm, are all present, responsible for leading the mission, and Scott expressed doubt. The use of the D-plane, because the X-Jet was not designed for space travel. Before Henji admits that he is also worried. Raven admitted that she was not as sure as she wanted to know, but promised that she would stop the mission at the first sign of danger. In the news it was reported that the US government asked for the help of the famous mutants. When Elixir did not take off, he spoke with NASA specialists. The pioneers remained without contact and no control of their path. When they arrived at the team's coordinates, he saw that damage on its axis was at an alarming speed, as was Raven. I'm not sure if the person in front of them did a solar torch or not. Scott was the first to use his power and release a slow energy beam. Durand Port teleported inside with Peter, and Storr shot the outer holes. Peter uses his speed to gather the pioneers, and Kurt moved them all. When the X-Jet was ready, one of the pioneers returned. He warned her that the commander was in a second cabin and there was no contradiction, but now she was almost swallowed up in the energy block and refused to risk the students. He told them that they could not leave anyone behind. He suggested that Jim used her strength to hold the entire boat during the rescue operation. She said she could, but not from this distance. I calculated that they only had 30 seconds. I said, take Jim to the second boat, and he got in and spun on the captain, and she's the boat catcher, all alone. Why the countdown? Now Devore is beaten and Kurt returns with the leader, but he fails to return to the gym in time. This unknown energy was passing through her body, and she understood that the huge cloud was also drying her. As she was receiving all her strength, she was able to direct this mass towards her, and absorb all the energy at once. All the people were watching in disbelief. Until now, this phenomenon has ended, and what remained was a sea body floating in space. And all the people took the same rest. When she opened her eyes, there were many people waiting for her in the hallway, and the celebration continued when they arrived at the school, but her mood was not at all celebratory. When she entered Xavier's office, angry at the nature of the recent dangerous missions, she accused the professor of endangering students in order to win medals and appear on the covers of magazines. He justified his decisions by the tragic past of mutants and those who were subjected to severe persecution. He always admitted that he was a danger to his kind in order to save humans, but her thought, there is no middle ground? And if they become heroes and remain heroes, they will return to being evil. And in the hospital, Hank, tell Jim that her tests are normal except in the genetic part according to the report. The experience that she missed is good for Jim, and the extent of her strength is limitless. All measures are an explanation that this was not supposed to happen, and it could be just a mistake in the machines. Jim, take the statement. She is resting, and met her suitor, and told him that she feels that she is better than the first, as if everything around her has weakened. At night, Margaret Smith was having dinner with her friends. As I was talking, her heart began to bother her, and she asked her to go to her dog. It was centered on the dark area between the trees, and Margaret finally understood why. When many aliens approached, they were walking in the forest without sound. One of them took the form of Margaret and returned into the dining room with indifferent expressions. The guests were afraid of her. Margaret's nut comes to ask her what happened. It was his attack, and its companions began to scream, and at the Xavier Student Palace they were having fun at a party outside. Hanka and Raven were their watchers, talking about the future of the Transformers. Hank still trusts Professor Xavier, but Raven senses that she has replaced a form of persecution. On the other hand, at the party, Scott said that Jim became famous, and the boys started calling her Monday. They were close to the fire at this time, and Jim suddenly began to feel weak, the moment that something was wrong, when one of the screens started making Jim's voice. She became very worried, and Jim's scream then swept the school with a powerful wave of energy before he lost consciousness. He was at a huge party with the elite in society. When he sensed the deviation that was happening, he quickly returned to the school and found Jim unconscious, able to see her mind as usual, and using a powerful device called Cerebro. He's too powerful to get into Jim Xavier's mind. He explained that he made some adjustments when Jim entered school and raised mental barriers to protect her from trauma. Now it is clear that her experience in space has affected these barriers as the three are collapsing. After that, they heard the voice of a man who was very surprised. Jim woke up and said that she heard her father's voice, and at this time, she knew that he was still alive. Xavier tried to convince her of hallucinations, but she sensed deception and pushed him out of her mind. Jim informed her suitor of the need to visit her father, emphasizing the danger of his proximity. "I don't want her to go." He told her he was willing to take the risk, but Jim numbed him with a touch on the back of his neck. He told me to examine everything when he woke up, and the professor decided to go and look at her, expecting that this meeting with her father would not remain positive. At the same time, the fake Margaret was meeting other fake people. Listen, the real one dissolves the illusion of the Dabari type. This is an alien race that escaped destruction. They want to seize the energy that Jim absorbed in order to rebuild their empire. The next day, Jim returned to her country, John Gray's ministry. Her father was also on the way. Raven expressed her disapproval of Xavier and told him that he had no right to lie to Jim, nor even interfere with her mental processes. At the same time, this family meeting was out of control. Jim, for a moment, there are no pictures of her in her father's house, and I asked him why. He didn't try to turn around, and she was reading his thoughts. She discovers that her entrance to the private school was originally scheduled before she met Xavier, because the professor had agreed on everything with John from the beginning. She goes deeper into her mind, sees what she did to her family, and we see the scene of the incident again. But this time it is clear that the girl is the one who caused her mother to faint. Jim was devastated by this truth, and her father was afraid when the house began to shake. But she explained that this was just her friends who arrived. Jim went out into the street angry and blaming Xavier for all his lies. Scott tried to talk to her, but the police cars had arrived, and Jim's force was on the verge of escaping. Control and upset by the serenades, Jim T. Arabies with a movement of her hands and began to float. I said he would answer it while the two of them fell on the roof and were destroyed inside the house in a very quick struggle. He escaped her blows by moving. Jim blew up the house in his face and made everything move slowly. Everything froze in the air, whether it was shells or lightning. The one who could only move normally is Peter. Because he was using his maximum speed, Jim removed the debris he was relying on to reach her, and let Petar take a bad hit when it became clear that she could avoid it. Xavier's need is for the Green Police and all the mutants except Raven, because the only solution now is dialogue. The strategy started well, and Jim became clear that she was calming down, but she preferred her position, and asked everyone to stay away so that no one would be harmed. She said that she would not back down or leave her behind, because this is the true meaning of the family. Her slogan overcame her, and she exploded again and flew away. Raven's body was impaled by wooden bars as she fell. Jim. She was terrified of herself again, and chased away with a blemish, and what remained remained. Raven was happy, but he couldn't, and at school, the boys heard the news and were afraid of Jim Scott. He told them that this was not intentional, and that Jim was still a loved person, but needed help. But she did not agree with Tam, and said that he was trying to ignore that his fiancée was not the same person he knew, Hank Palmyra. Tam blamed Xavier for the loss of Raven. He said that she only saw the truth and that she paid the price for Professor John Gray's mistakes. They were actually two aliens disguised above, wanting to know everything about Jim, and when John was no longer cooperating with them, and because the two were a little strange, she changed her plan, and the screaming started. After a few days without a goal, Jim went to the island of Genosha, which has refugee converts and students to help Eric, also known as his madness. She felt that it would be easier for her to learn to control herself with harm. Many people. Like her, Eric did not promise anything until he knew exactly what happened. But their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two helicopters from the U.S. Army, circling around Jim and going to the defense. Eric said that he did not see it. It is clear that he does not like this type of surprise visits, but after that, the blades of one of the helicopters began to move on their own. He understood that Jim was trying to destroy it. He used his strength to try to contain it, but when he saw the extent of its strength, he was able to save the soldiers. After Jim destroyed one of the helicopters and caused massive destruction in the village, she tried to destroy the second, when all the soldiers were riding, but using all. He shocked who? Al Jazeera along this incident appeared in the news as a second disaster related to the mutant Jim Gray. The ambassador was disappointed when he heard that the government was already planning a containment plan for all mutants who were emerging as a new force. He called the president and knew that this line would close soon. At the same time in New York, an old man was drinking in a bar when Jim's picture appeared on television and encouraged the public to report to the authorities. If they had seen it, they would have sat on me. I saluted the old man. We see that this old man is Jim herself, and she controls the minds of all people so that they see an old man in her place. This trick did not work with Fak, because her mind is not like the minds of earthly people. When the two dragons spoke, we would conquer the palace without saying anything to anyone, and he went to Eric to ask for his help in that he was going after Jim. He said no. She had hoped for him from them, but after that, Eric felt a mistake, and didn't know yet if she was dead, and the news shook him so much that she took Jim to a luxurious residence under control. She said that no one here is afraid of her, but one of her allies whispered to the rest that everything must be ready. If the guest cannot control her power, she will have to be destroyed, and above, she converted one of the rooms into a realistic simulation of outer space. She said that the energy she absorbed came from the oldest cosmic energy, the same energy that destroyed her planet. But the Dubari had been monitoring it since then, so that they could control its power. But this energy cloud destroys everything it touches. Jim's error was in trying to trap Dee's power rather than using it strategically. To the point that it could create new worlds, Eric was putting on his helmet that he had retired from. He was determined that he would take revenge, and Xavier, he knew that he was involved. The mutants decided to go to New York to prevent the tragedy that would happen to Hanky and Eric. They were ready to attack. When they arrived, he is still trying to start a dialogue, but Eric was very angry in his brutal form and rushed into the street crowd and the cause of the chaos. Eric intended to float Jim, but he would still have to avoid Scott, the young mutant, near his madwoman. But his strength did not reach the strongest. The companions of each commander began to fight each other, and we seek Harat because he was out of people's places and was trying to save many people at the same time. A heartbreak from Eric's allies, but she was liberated by a strong storm on a bus full of scared tourists. Xavier, he tried to reduce the damage by using his mental strength to fight the opponents, but Eric had more tricks. He got out a metro car and opened a big hole in the middle of the street. After that, he entered the building and used the car to open a big hole in the middle of the street. And Jim was ready to defend himself. Eric, a child for her. The spear was dangerously close to her, but after that, he turned the spear. The sharp end of the spear was dangerously close to her, but after that, he fell and broke on the ground. It was clear that Jim allowed the spear. It was so close, but after that, he fell and broke on the ground. It was clear that Jim allowed the spear. It was just to act because she was 100% under control. Jim raised her hands and squeezed the air between them. Jim raised her hands and squeezed the air between them. The movement was reflected in the metal helmet. Manny asked Kurt to take him inside and start talking to Jim. He told her that she can control herself because she is capable of anything. She mocked this talk. She proved that it was true, and she let the professor stop and walk while he smashed the wheelchair. When the two remained face to face, he said that he would not be able to enter her mind again, but she still could enter his mind, and then he begged her that she would do that. Jim was emotionally affected, and she lived the second few sweet moments of her childhood. She also saw the rest of the conversation between Xavier and her father John. He told him that the girl, there is no hope in her, but the professor insisted that there is always hope until now, while she is in terrible pain. He told her that time had not yet been searched. After that, the fiery light in Jim Heidi's eyes, while she was still above. She felt that she was losing the earth from under her leg, and she said that all this is but the past, and that Jim needs to think about the future. Jim said that she does not want this power, and she said above, that she can take it if she wants it. The satellite accepted the offer, and the process began. The cosmic energy enveloped the arms of the two, and the power was transferred from one to the second. The exoviruses are in them. Jim will not be able to live the transfer process and beg them to stop, but above Rada, human lives are not important, and she reveals her true intentions. She said that this world will remain hers. She and her species will destroy all humans. Exhausted despair, and he begins to talk to Jim and beg her that she is trying to be liberated, but she is still in a state and unconscious. Now, he is silent. he was able to enter the building and hit him in the jaw with an explosion and cut off the process. Outside, the army arrived with specialized weapons to fight the mutants. Hanka and Storm, forced to wear jackets to hide their Port Kentlet power, but it wasn't long before all the mutants caught them, and in the back alley above, she came back from the fall and saw that she was able to retain part of the mutant power. They took the train to Xavier Private Prison, apologized to Hank, and admitted that he was wrong in everything. He said that these new forces are modifying Jim's personality, but he swore that the real Jim is still there, and raised that she deserves that they fight to save her. He also said about Fark and warned that she will not surrender easily. At the same time, many aliens were climbing the walls of the tunnel and waiting inside the mutant train. They heard a solid bang on the ceiling without understanding. Because these aliens were hanging on the train, a pilot took a big hit. When he saw these people walking on the roof of the train and warned the soldiers inside, they thought that the invaders were. Are you saying they're trying to free prisoners? They did not believe the warnings of Eric and Xavier when they said that this threat was much greater. When the Aldebari aliens entered Arabia, it did not appear that they needed any effect on them. Bullets. But they were able to wound them superficially, and they were able to regenerate in moments while they were balanced on the roof of the country. They were able to land the helicopters simply by throwing the invaders' needs, and they arrived in the penultimate Arab country quickly. They began to attack the door, and those who entered Qatar preferred to ask for help from someone to save them, and they promised that they would help in the fight. When the door opened, the soldiers were completely slaughtered. One of the soldiers, when he saw that he no longer had a choice, freed the mutants. That's when the real fighting began. Transformed, forgetting their differences to defeat their common enemy. Scott blew open the door that led to the last Arabic, and Xavier fevered there, electrified the ducts from the roof, and Eric used parts of the diameter to attack them. Boar went crazy. When the last soldier died because he was the one who said that his son was a fan of Transformers, instead of continuing to save people with teleport, he started using his power to attack and take one of the enemies on the rails, but before the diameter was counted seconds. Eric fought some aliens without difficulty, but after that he found himself besieged by them. Fortunately, Storm helped him with a strong storm and sold many of them to the last Arabian. When he saw that there were only enemies inside the Arabian, Eric held his grip firmly and thus crushed the Arabian. All unfortunately, the group has not yet faced the strongest alien, because above now, she jumped from the bridge and crushed Hank in the same movement. My lightning storm is not limited to her, and she even estimated that she was redirecting it to defeat her opponent. Another one arrived to fight aliens. But one of them just ran and jumped from the tug and hit the pilot through the Zaz this time over Eric's facade, and she is the first unit worth talking to. It is his idea that he himself wanted to take revenge on Jim a few hours ago, but Eric said that he changed his mind. He is the face of all weapons, the jaw, and he started shooting constantly. But this is blunt. Her movement, even as she moves her hand like expelling a Dabana, she threw it violently at the guard. Even Scott's beam could not stop it. And in the last Arab, Xavier was able to communicate with Jim with the ability of the telepathic. She told him that she forgave him for everything he did, and she understood that he just wanted to give her a family. When Jim arrived, Loxaphir said that she was protecting her family. Her body lifted from the restraints, and she opened her eyes and flew up from the diameter, and Jim. She lifted all the Arab women into passion and protected all the Transformers who came in with bangs. No one was injured, even when the Arabs fell. The aliens also lived, but they ran to her side and were destroyed along, even when one of them was able to strike her with a spear also. The wound closed when he preferred. But above, she grabbed Jim by her neck in an attempt to absorb the rest of her strength. The cosmic energy grew around them and began to threaten everyone around them. After that, Jim took up space and allowed the energy to consume them both, and from Earth, the mutants. They saw the last explosion that made the shape of a huge phoenix in the sky. After that, we see that Xavier's school has changed its name to honor Jim Gray, and Heng is now the new principal. He retired, and tried to enjoy time alone in France, but Eric met her wanting to play chess with him. And I will not forget when Xavier made a house, and now it is a role hosting the professor, and the film ended in the spirit of the phoenix as it hovers around the earth. If you liked the video, encourage us, like, and subscribe to the channel so you can see more videos and meet in a new summary, and thank you for watching.